Pleased to be here and part of this gathering. I've been following some of your conversations and some of the excellent presentations. I'm very pleased to be here today. My name is Joanne Caddy. I lead the Pisa for Schools team at the Oecd. And we work in the Directorate for Education and Skills. So based in Paris and a global organization. At this point, I'd just like to check that everyone can see me, hear me, and see my slides. So I'm having a look at the chat box, and I hope all is well. Very good. So the work that we've been doing is really school-based work, and I'm very, very interested to have feedback and questions from the people who are participating today. So the title of my presentation is about empowering schools through comparative data and global peer learning. And this is a rather large mouthful, but it is important that I take you through each of these concepts. I hope by the end of the presentation, you'll have many questions about how we can do all of those things. So the OECD is an organization based in Paris. And now I'm having problems advancing with my slides. So please bear with me for one more moment. Very good. So as I said, I work at the OECD. It is an organization based in Paris, so I'm talking to you from Paris. And our organization has over the world that we serve are 37 member countries that are based all around the world in all sorts of countries. So our mantra and our philosophy is about better policies for better lives. We have a number of member countries that have delegations in Paris. It is an organization that has a great number of meetings, and our directorate, which is the Directorate for Education and Skills, has a lot of different programs. One of them is quite well known. It's the Pisa program, the Program for International Student Assessment. And the other aspects of our work very much focus on teaching and learning. So I'm very pleased to share some of those insights with those of you who are in the classroom as practitioners, as experts in this important process of teaching and learning. We also do work with governments, both member governments and non-member governments, on policy development and implementation. And we work a lot about thinking about the future of education, issues of innovation, and what will be next. Some of the key points of Pisa are very important for me to share with you as background to our project, which is called Pisa for Schools. So Pisa is an important international assessment of 15-year-olds' competencies. And I'd like to just give you a little bit of a background of what Pisa is, the Program for International Student Assessment. And the interesting part for many of you who are connected here today from Romania is that Romania has been a participant in Pisa for several cycles. The assessment takes place every 3 years. The latest collection of data was in 2018. And the assessment is a computer-based assessment and lasts 2 hours. The content is important to talk about just briefly. Students are 15 years of old when they take this test, and it focuses on reading, mathematics, and science. And in 2018, the larger proportion of the questions were around reading. There was a special focus on reading. So I think that will be of interest to those of you who are engaged in literacy, reading, and those type of competences, whether in Romanian or in English or in other languages. So the students, as I said, are 15 years of age. This age group was selected at the beginning of the Pisa program as representing the student body just as they transition to the end of their schooling, or in some cases, go forth into the world of apprenticeships or of work. So 15-year-old students are the candidates of the test, and the content is correctly pitched to their age and stage. The background questionnaire is very important too. Pisa gives a half an hour student questionnaire so that students can talk about and give some information about their background. The student questionnaire allows us to know a lot of things about their attitudes to learning, classroom discipline and climate, but also about their home environment. And it helps us construct a very important indicator of socioeconomic background. So those are the main pillars, if you will, about Pisa. But the main point really about the Pisa frameworks is there's an emphasis on skills, on the competence-based approach to teaching and learning. So it's not about what the student can regurgitate or have as a rote learning, but it's really the tasks and the difficulty of those tasks that they can complete. So for example, if we talk about reading literacy, the emphasis is on being able to navigate texts, on being to connect different texts, to complete a task, to have a purposeful reading. And we have 6 levels of proficiency in which the students' answers are classified, going from level 6, who are really very, very expert readers. Those type of proficiency levels at the very top of the Pisa scales means that a reader is able to pick up very fine details in complex texts, are able to connect different concepts within a text or several texts, and have analysis. Level 1 and 2 are really at the bottom of the scale. Level 2 proficiency means that a reader is able to do the simplest of tasks in navigating a simple text, and actually being able to make very simple inferences. So a very much lower level of reading proficiency. Level 2 is considered as being the level of proficiency that's needed to be able to begin to function in an adult world in a very complex society such as those we live in. So there is a range of proficiencies that are mapped by Pisa, and they're mapped in almost 80 countries around the world who participated in 2018. So it truly is a global assessment that is suited and translated and adapted to the specific context of each country. So here's a quick map of the participating countries. All of the 37 Oecd member countries participated, but also many partner countries and economies. So for example, Romania is a Pisa country. So it is a really very, very widespread assessment. As I said, almost 80 countries that have been taking this test for several years. But the real question that it seeks to answer, and the more deep conversation we might be able to have together today, is what are the skills that our students need to succeed in life and in their future? And this is an old piece of data, but it's nonetheless very relevant. This is from the United States, some academics who had looked at the types of tasks that are required in different occupations. They were looking at the United States, but this pattern is very similar to all advanced economies, certainly all the European economies, such as Romania. What you can see here is you can see a rapid decline between 1960 and 2010 of routine manual work. And that's not surprising. We know that machines have displaced manual labor. Of course, we've known that for some time with the automation of factory jobs, for example. But what is also interesting is you can see the decline in routine cognitive as well. And what does that mean? That means that many of the tasks that needed to be done by humans are now being done by software. So if you think of people maybe in your family or friends who are accountants, for example, which used to be a very specialized line of work, actually much of the work of an accountant can be done now by software. So the occupations that are now looking for people to fill them, the jobs that are available in the job market, are very, very different today in 2020 than they were ever before. What we see, though, is an increase in demand or an increase in the tasks that are needed to do, for example, non-routine analytic. So non-routine analytic means really problem solving. That's what it means. So problem solving and non-routine interpersonal, so communication skills. So these are important pieces of feedback from the demand side of the skills equation. What is it that employers are looking for? How can we equip our students, not just for the workplace, but also for societies? And what we think at the OECD is this type of demand for skills of this nature will continue with new technologies, with an acceleration of everything we can see around us. Just if you think about the reading competences needed to navigate instructions to be able to join a conference such as this one online, they're really very advanced. So the types of skills that we're being asked to deploy as adults is also being asked of our students. And here I would simply pause and say the complete obvious for everyone who's teaching anyone around the world today is with the COVID-19 crisis, with the immediate switch, in a way, to distance learning, the importance of these problem-solving skills and advanced literacy skills and being able to navigate complex information has never been so clear. So I'd just like to move on and give you an idea of the map of a portfolio of skills. So if we step back for a moment and think about these 15-year-olds that we're having sit the Pisa test, what is it that we want them to equip themselves during their journey through school? So obviously there'll be technical skills in the sense of basic cognitive skills of reading, of literacy, of numeracy, knowing what to do and knowing how to do. So that covers also the very important skills of vocational education, for example, but also behavioral and social skills. We need these types of qualities of perseverance, leadership, collaboration, and communication, but also creativity, critical thinking, ability to make connections, and metacognition. That is a lot to ask of a 15-year-old. And I think what we need to reflect upon as adults working for the benefit of children everywhere is to really try and think hard about how do we develop those skills, how do we encourage social-emotional skills that will allow students to self-organize and gain mastery and perseverance. And one of the clearest demonstrations of this has been what we have asked of students around the world from distance learning when their classrooms have been closed. So this idea of a portfolio of skills, I'd like to leave it with you. I hope it makes sense, because I think every teacher is trying to convey these types of bundles of skills. So I'd like to talk to you a bit about the project that I'm very fortunate to lead at the OECD called Pisa for Schools. And it may give you some interest to know that and you'll probably share our vision of excellence in teaching and learning for all students. And when we say all students, we really mean all students. So not just the best and the brightest, but to manage to reach and ensure excellence and equity in everything that is done. So our mission as a project is to improve student learning and well-being by empowering teachers and school leaders through post-assessment activities and global connections. How do we do this? I'll spend a little bit more time in this presentation on the types of activities that we've put together. So First of all, the Pisa-based test for school is a child of Pisa, if you will. It is a form of Pisa frameworks in reading, maths, and science that has been put together and deployed for schools to be able to see how the 15-year-olds are doing. So again, like Pisa, the Pisa-based test for school is designed to assess secondary school students, and they're nearing the end of their compulsory education. We've now administered this assessment in over 5,000 schools around the world in 13 very different countries. The test itself is a 2-hour digital test that tests reading, maths, and science. Again, all of these are competence-based assessments. So it's about seeing if the student thinks like a scientist, that the student can think like a mathematician, that it can be familiar with reading strategies, for example. And we also have a 30-minute student questionnaire, which delivers these extremely important insights in student voice. So the students are anonymous, and they know that they're anonymous, so they can share quite freely some important information about their perceptions of motivation for learning, whether they know their futures, but also classroom discipline, bullying, for example, and very importantly, some background information about their home environment. So, for example, the background questionnaire asks the student to say, for example, what is the highest level of study that your mother completed or your father completed? What is the work that they do today? And all of this information is very important in creating an index of socioeconomic background, and I'll come to that in a minute. We have the test available in 10 languages, from Japanese to Spanish and Arabic. And the important thing here is the Pisa-based test for school is designed to be done in the language of instruction. So I know that many of you may be teachers of a foreign language, so teachers of English in Romania. But if we were to be able to one day offer the Pisa for Schools test in Romania, first we would have to make sure that all of the items, the questions are translated into Romanian, if that's the main language of instruction of the children. And finally, it's a digital assessment. We do it either online or offline. And this is very important both to lower the costs and increase access. So there you are, a couple of key facts about the Pisa-based test for school. So what I'd like to leave you with is the idea that Pisa, which is this very large program which serves almost 80 countries around the world and is done every 3 years on a national level, it provides important information on how a country is performing. But the Pisa-based test for school that we provide shows how well a school is performing. So they are comparable for the simple reason that both of these assessments are based on the same frameworks. So we are able to compare the performance of a school with, for example, the performance of the entire country that they happen to be in, or indeed other countries that have done the Pisa test. So that's an important point because we're also able to go beyond a single school. And for example, in some places, we've provided group reports for networks of schools or for local education authorities. The other part about Pisa-based test for school is it can be administered once a year on a yearly basis. Don't need to wait 3 years in order to do the next cycle. So that's the differences between Pisa and Pisa for schools. But I think it might be more interesting, to be honest, to share with you some insights into what each school can receive. So each school that does this Pisa-based test for school receives a school report. It's a tailored school report for each school. So there's a common template, there's a common matrix, which means that every school in the world is getting a common frame of reference, but their own unique data from their own students. So here's an example of one of the many graphs and charts that are in a school report. And you can see from this that you're able, and a school is able, to compare your school to your own country, if it's a participant in Pisa, but also to other countries. Here, just to explain quickly, here we have the reading, mathematics, and science scores of a particular school. It happens to be a school in Russia. So this is the green dot, shows the average performance of the students in that school in reading, for example. And as you can see, this school students perform better. They get a higher PISA scale score than the Russian average. But this is the OECD average, which is lower still. So these are an example of a particular school. In mathematics, we have a different lineup where the school is performing less well than the country it's in, and the OECD average. What I'd like to draw your attention to here, and this is important for those of you who are statistically minded, the confidence interval is provided by this shaded horizontal blue part. So this means that the differences between these three different performances is actually not statistically significant. But if we look over here in mathematics, this school is performing worse than its own country's average in Pisa, and it is statistically significant. So there is a real difference. So that's just to give you an idea that the type of information that is given back to the school based on this investment of student time, of a cohort of 15-year-olds in their school, is actually quite fine-grained, and it provides important information for school leaders and teachers. Here's another example, just to share with you one that's not a performance, it's not about proficiency levels, but this chart, which I hope you can see, comes from questions from the background. So the background questionnaire asks a lot of questions about motivation. So for example, this first question is about, do you think that studying science will help you in your future career? And as we can see again, the school is below the Russian average, but is higher than the OECD average of students answering that same question in other places. So what we can see here is some important and structured information about how students view their own learning. And we know, and you know very well as teachers, that when you look at learning, the motivation for learning is extremely important part of the equation about the efficacy of learning. So finding out what students think about the utility value, their instrumental value, if you will, of their learning is also really important. So these are just two examples of the type of information. So very briefly, I'll just go through this quickly so we have time also for conversations. That we have the first year in which the work is really about adapting and translating our Pisa-based test for school, for example, into Romanian, say. We do a validation study just to make sure that we have, for that first year, a good range of schools that represent the great diversity of schools that could be in a country like Romania, so rural and urban, high socioeconomic background, low socioeconomic background, and that have 15-year-olds in the schools. And then from the second year, this assessment is actually available to, once it's been validated and approved, it can be used by many schools in many places. Now, I'd just like to sort of pause for a moment because I think it's important that we think about the context in which this work is being done. And one of the things which, those of you who may be familiar or very interested in assessment is only part of the story. Right? It's a very important part because if we cannot assess student learning, it's extremely hard for us to make improvements in teaching practice and in student outcomes. But what we've understood very well in the Pisa for Schools team is that the assessment is just the beginning of the story. Actually, it's just the beginning of the story. So when the assessment's done, when the school report is delivered into the hands of the headmaster or headmistress and lead teachers, what happens next is what's interesting, is that data-based or comparative data that can link that school's performance, both nationally and internationally, can be a very powerful motor for conversations within this teaching body. Some schools that have taken part in Pisa for Schools in certain countries have, for example, some schools in northeastern Brazil, very enthusiastic users of the Pisa-based test for school. They share their school reports, not just with the teaching staff, they have workshops and discuss the results, but also with parents. And I think that's a really important point because the Pisa framework is, as I said, competence-based. It's universal in that sense. It's about how can children demonstrate, how can students, their ability to apply what they know. And so this is a very powerful concept of competence-based teaching, learning, and assessment, but it's not one that's very familiar to many people. So it's actually a good opportunity as well to start a conversation in a school about what does it mean to see about to understand how we can improve student outcomes. So what we've put together is quite a lot of activities that come afterwards, after the school report, which is chock full of data and analysis, is to start conversations. So we provided a very useful reader's guide so that people can understand what information they have, but also we provided a video tutorial. Most importantly, which I think is of interest here too, because what this conference is showing is that there's a very active potential for sharing of ideas amongst teachers and school leaders, not just from one country, but for several. So we've also set up an online community for participating schools. And this community is multilingual in the sense that you can type your question in Brazilian Portuguese and talk to a colleague in a school in Spain. And the really powerful aspect of this community is that participating schools have all done the same assessment. They've each got their own school report, but that means that they really understand the results that each of them are getting. So, for example, a headmistress from a school in a suburb of Madrid that's serving disadvantaged children can reach out to a school serving a similar population, reading scores. What have you been doing? What are the practices or approaches that you've been doing in your school? So it makes it a very powerful tool for comparison, but not just sterile comparison, if I may say so, but useful comparison for professional learning. So the idea of peer learning is an important one here too. So we also are developing work to help schools, individual schools and groups of schools, to go through the data they have and have evidence-based conversations about school improvement. On the school community that we built for participating schools, there are lots and lots of opportunities to ask questions of each other. So it's not really a question of asking the OECD for advice. I would never be so bold or foolish to offer advice to head of a school or head of a reading department or head of a foreign language department in their expertise, which is teaching. But connecting those experts, those expert practitioners with others, that yes. And that's where the Oecd comes in as a platform for peer learning and sharing of ideas. So I think at this point, I'd like to just leave you with an idea of a way of framing international assessments in such a way that they can be actually useful to teachers and school leaders in their daily lives. So I'd be very happy to have questions. I see that there are many hellos in the chat box, but and if Clara agrees as our moderator, I think maybe the floor could be open for questions. So I'm seeing some questions that have come up in the course of this presentation. And rightly so, there's a lot of interest in teaching of foreign languages. So I'll give people time to write a few questions. So I'll start with this first question. I see this interest, of course, as I know the main common denominator from yourselves as professional teachers of foreign languages, such as English or other languages, is how important it is to look at reading strategies. So while our Pisa for Schools test does not look at the teaching of a foreign language, that's not part of the Pisa frameworks. It's all about literacy in one's own mother tongue. That's the aspect which is important to understand the tools, shall we say, that the student is bringing to their own language, which of course they're going to apply also when they're learning a foreign language. So I'm sure as teachers of foreign languages, you are very familiar with helping students gain mastery on a language, in a language which is not their own, and to navigate text. And probably some of those tips and tricks that advanced readers use in their own language are transferable. But there is no direct look at foreign language. I would like to say, this may be of interest to you, that the Pisa team is now currently exploring in very early stages whether it is indeed possible in a comparative study to actually compare students' propensity to be able to learn a foreign language effectively. But I have to say this is a very early days, and it will take several years of work, methodological work, for making it robust. But there is a lot of interest in that. People have asked also, can we see a PISA test? There are actually quite a lot of publicly released PISA items. So you can find examples of PISA reading items, questions online. If you just go and type into a search engine PISA reading items, or indeed the PISA reading framework from 2015, which is a fascinating read about how students construct strategies for effective reading at different levels of proficiency. So I don't know if there are other questions that people would like to put into the chat box, but I'm very, very happy to be able to take a few more. We have some more time. I think someone has said something important about educational managers, and it is something that we are very keen to ensure, is that this type of project is well and truly based in the school. So our main audience, if you will be school principals, but very often municipal authorities or regional authorities will be also very important in a Pisa for Schools project. So basically, if you have ideas of entities or potential partners that would like to introduce PISA-based tests for school in Romania, definitely reach out, send me an email. My email is on the last slide here. We'd be very interested to work with Romania closer on this project, and particularly for building those sort of learning networks between teachers, based on data that they can really get their teeth into and can advance their own teaching practices. I can see many thank you, so I appreciate very much your appreciation in the chat box. And I'll just give it another couple of minutes to see if anyone has any questions. Please do feel free to ask very direct questions. So with that, I think I would like to wish you all a very pleasant rest of the afternoon, a very good rest of the session and continuation. Thank you very much for your time and your attention today. Thank you very much.